Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third panel, Archival, Reckonings, and Praxis. We're really excited, and I'm honored to moderate this panel. It's been an honor to be the project manager for this first inaugural cohort. And this panel just explores what happens when we resist, refuse, or reimagine the archive through oral histories, community-based records, or alternate forms of knowledge. Our panelists today offer each their own powerful interventions. Each fellow's work spans between the fields of art, performance, rhetoric, and memory and literature. And just a brief introduction, Naida Collazo Lorenz is a visual artist that works in various media, including drawing, video, installations, and site-specific works. Dr. Keishla Rivera Lopez is a literary and cultural studies scholar, writer, and poet, specializing in Latinidad, cultural production, archives, and memory. Dr. Carrie Soto Vega is an assistant professor of cultural rhetoric in the Department of English at the Pennsylvania State University. And Xenia Rubinos is a New York-based vocalist, composer, and performing artist who centers embodiment and the voice as a living archive of the body. So each person, of course, has 10 minutes to do their wonderful thing, and then we will open up the floor for the question and answer.
First, I want to thank CENTRO and everyone at CENTRO for this opportunity. And, my cohort, it's been a pleasure and an honor to be part of this cohort this year. So throughout the years, and as part of my studio art practice, I have worked with the archive as gesture, concept, and material. The wall installation titled Evidencia, consists of over 700 small bags with organic elements I collected from the ground for a period of over a year and a half. Alongside its digital, interactive, and more introspective component, not shown here, it served as a personal archive tracking time, locations, and memories. That was also the case with the numbered series, but this time I worked with small drawings on paper. Each had a serial number which documented the date and time of completion. I have worked with my own family archives, as in the video Circa 1978, for which I digitized and re-edited a home movie that was originally shot in Super 8 film by my dad. It shows me as a kid playing a magic trick for the camera. It took place in El Patio de la Casa, in Santurce, where I grew up. For the past 11 years, I've been working with found and collected maps as part of the Geo Disconnect series, which combine frame clippings of maps with color paper. Besides fragmentation of territories and geography, I was exploring the structure of the grid as something that can visually generate connections as well as isolate. The first few installations, like this one, included mostly geopolitical maps, but later I worked with nautical charts used for ocean navigation and aeronautical charts used by pilots. And I also added maps of the moon or lunar charts. For this one, I mostly focused on areas of water, oceans, lakes, rivers, which is why the color blue is so present. There is an emphasis on maps of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, although there are also maps from other regions around the globe, as well as maps of the moon and also other planets. In those two cases, I focused on topographic areas named after seas or oceans, such as the Mare Boreum in Mars, or the Northern Sea in Mars as well, or the Sea of Tranquility in the moon. As part of my research fellowship here at CENTRO, I've been working on a new Geo Disconnect installation focused on the Puerto Rican diaspora. I've been looking for points of departure and arrival, towns and barrios left behind, and places people moved to or were taken to or relocated to starting at the end of the 19th century. That research is informing the choice of maps that I'm seeking and using. So last October, I spent time at CENTRO archives doing research for this project. And I was also able to explore the materiality of the archives, so just the translucent papers that allow us to see through them while simultaneously concealing details. I was interested in the different marks, the ones that highlight and the ones that cover up information. I think about repetition, rhythm, and abstract marks as content. And I'm intrigued by how they can relate both to absence and presence. I found cells void of text and numbers, but filled with visual traces of the technologies used to print and reproduce those pages throughout time. I found structure, data, and marks that were added and erased. This particular page made me think of mapping in some way, or perhaps it's music that could be played. I found materials and surfaces embedded with creases, folds, and textures. In those cases, I could not read those marks, but I could feel them, I could experience them as an object as well. In these pages about Puerto Ricans in Hawaii from the Blaise Camacho Salsa collection, I found this note about food that made me think about my grandmother's recipes. These are two recipes that were transcribed by my mom many decades ago, because of course, mi abuela did not write down any recipes, they had them in their heads. But anyway, so my family, we still have ababuchas, flan de vainilla, and abarmindas, flan de calabaza, thanks to that transcription. But the point is that the stains found at Centro in the Camacho Sausa's note, shown here on the left, yeah, your left, reminded me of what might be stains of milk or eggs on my family's record of my grandmother's recipes. Even while I was there in the archives, it brought up memories and flavors. So my research at the archives was intuitive and open-ended. It allowed for all kinds of digressions and shifts as I navigated the larger structure or zoomed in when something called my attention. And I kept zooming in closer, and I found my own location where I currently live, about 45 minutes away from Lake Michigan. And in wanting to get closer, I would get lost in the noise and the blur and its powerful abstraction. The blur was also present when forwarding and rewinding microfilm, which made me think about transient memories and layered histories. And I thought about gaps and voids as I navigated between form and content of the microfilms. And by chance, I found lies and plains and pain, all three so related to our diaspora. And I selected words and fragments of grainy photos, and I'm still working on exploring what might be generated by their dislocation and rearrangement. And as the research continues in my studio, I consider the conceptual and visual potential of my findings. And I continue to work with my own archives, maps and found materials, fragments of prints and drawings, and family documents I have inherited. I consider points of convergence, but also the spaces in between, as I work on drawings with collaged elements. I have been exploring disjointedness and what might get concealed or camouflaged through overlaps. In thinking about the archive, I find it difficult to untangle the structure and its content, and I get excited by the potential elasticity of its mapping. By sampling and remixing different kinds of maps, both old and new, I hope to generate a new diasporican cartography. And I know it's impossible for this work to represent the entire diaspora. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I want is for the work to evoke the complexity beyond the binary of here and there, and to explore the visual poetics of the political, geographic, and emotional entanglement of our diaspora and the archipelago. The curved shapes added onto each map have been cut out from a series of digital prints I produced a few years ago titled Remap. I think of these print fragments as part of a different type of map, an interwoven space perhaps, or rhizome that connects all of us in the diaspora. So what I'm proposing with my work, and particularly with this work, requires a different kind of navigation, one that challenges the concept of distance and through which location, memories, and relationships are interconnected and entangled. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am thankful for the gift of your time as we gather on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, with also a special attention to being here in El Barrio, a historically Puerto Rican neighborhood, for the Rooted and Relational Symposium. I'm also super thankful and happy to be a part of the inaugural cohort of research fellows. I've learned so much being in dialogue with all of you, with Vanessa, our faculty presider, Yomaira, who's the director here, but also my mentor, and also Ise and Cristel and all the staff here at CENTRO. I'm going to be as quick and brief as possible. I've cut down this presentation multiple times, so bear with me. My first book, Boricua Projects, emerged while reflecting on my childhood, the communities I've resided in, and my homeland of Puerto Rico. Particularly, as a Boricua of the diaspora, I did not see myself or the histories of my ancestors or an understanding of the migration of multiple family members to the United States in what I was learning in at school. And that led me to really reflect on the questions: who decides what and who gets remembered and how? Who decides what we learn and what deserves to be documented? I'm excited to share this work with you today, as it is a part of a chapter of my book where I focus on my research muse, Bad Bunny Baby. Lo hice. Archives and archive studies have long been preoccupations of the fields of literature and history. The works of Jacques Derrida, Marissa Fuentes, Sadia Hartman, Yomaira Figueroa Vasquez, Tristan Platt, and others inform my understanding about the archive and archivization. My book engages with the archival turn, as they also engage with, as it examines and showcases how alternative ways of knowing and remembering are used by numerous communities to reconcile with erasure and marginalization. These narratives entail conceptualizations of freedom, self-autonomy, as well as reimagining the Puerto Rican diaspora's livelihoods and utopias in the post-catastrophic. And I came up with my own term. As a counter to the often overdetermined discourse of the archive, I conceptualize cultural memory projects as projects that preserve, protect, and document the lived experiences of a group of people. These are created, co-constituted, and curated by the groups themselves, shifting the dynamics of power at play in traditional archivization practices. And we've heard a lot about that and how people are resisting the institution of the archive, and this panel seems to focus on ways of memory building and protecting and documenting that are outside of that. So that's sort of where this is coming from. Whether they are literature, documentaries, or performances, these cultural memory projects serve as representations of the collective experiences and livelihoods of site-specific populations that can also serve as tools to educate the national population. I suggest that Puerto Rican cultural memory projects in my book challenge how archives capture what Puerto Rican communities in the diaspora, in exile, and on the archipelago look like, and help us overcome the gaps and fragmentation in narratives. And for what we came for. Bearing that in mind, I turn to Benito Antonio Casio Martinez, who is better known by his stage moniker, Bad Bunny, and what I find engaging in his works. And I can't get into all of it, so this is going to be a big scope of his archival arc. In the chapter, I trace Bad Bunny's music, lyrical form, and aesthetics in relation to catastrophe and other moments of social and political rupture that coalesce into the full-length cultural memory projects that he intimately archives, how Puerto Ricans respond to and navigate catastrophe. I contextualize his work as material productions within popular culture that, in the wake of their release, production, and content, capture, document, or bear witness to a significant moment or event. I argue the act of documenting Puerto Rican joy by Bad Bunny and his team and Puerto Rican life amid disaster and catastrophe, coupled through his lyrical and visual form, is a part of his archival practice. So yes, I'm saying he's an archivist. Be mad. Though they appear as differing genres throughout his discography and career. So to highlight the archival arc, I say that it begins with Estamos Bien in the Por Siempre album that was released in 2018. And though I analyzed the lyrics and the music video, for the sake of this presentation, I'm just gonna focus really quickly on the music video itself, which is followed by El Apagón, a mini documentary in Un Verano Sin Ti, which was released in 2022. And most recently, in January 2025, Debí Tirar Más Fotos, which also has a lyrical message and a short film that was accompanied titled in the same way. But before I get there, I begin the chapter meditating on the notion of being left in the dark and how this has influenced Bad Bunny's archival impulse and the general need to invest in Puerto Rican memory. What does darkness mean? Simply, it is the absence of light. When light is rendered a source of information or clarity, it also symbolizes the lack of information or knowledge. There is one moment in which I'm thinking about where Puerto Ricans were left in the dark, and not only Puerto Ricans in the archipelago, but also in the diaspora. And this was in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Maria, when the island literally went dark due to a lack of power. The haunting image of the map of Puerto Rico, similar to this that I saw in the news, has stayed with me and has been the beginning of much revelation. I was gonna play a clip, but I'm not allowed to for the time constraints, but I encourage you to watch when you can. Released in the post-Hurricane Maria era, a year after the hurricane, Bad Bunny's song, Estamos Bien, was an anthem to survival and joy and contrasted most of what was being covered in the news about Puerto Ricans. He made a declarative statement and presented it in a music video that was shot in like a home movie with a handheld camera and his friends, where the song was repeatedly stating the lyrics, Estamos bien, we're good. By driving with his friends and filming Puerto Ricans at the beach enjoying their lives in the mundane, Bad Bunny purposefully subverted the dominant narrative of the time that relied on outdated stereotypes and victimhood. So I'm also thinking about darkness as a metaphor and how darkness is mostly thought of as a lack of knowledge and a lack of power in El Apagón. The title formalizes the pervasiveness of blackouts in Puerto Rico due to the unreliable, detrimental electric grid provided by Luma in a neocolonial agreement per the US government. And it also states, people live here, which draws upon the stories of displacement in the archipelago. Throughout the optics, Bad Bunny represents Puerto Ricans in the dark, thus representing the notion of the blackout, but still enjoying their lives with joy and happiness, creating their own joy and light, and thus their own freedom. This mini documentary is a visual representation of Puerto Rican life on the island, post-Maria and Fiona, which I argue is its own non-traditional archive. Here, Bad Bunny constructs a narrative of Puerto Ricans finding light in the dark as an inevitable response to the perpetual blackouts from a failing energy grid, and one that also inverts the oppressive states to one of resilience and joy. And this is mostly seen, I can't show it again, but in the perreo scene where you see a bunch of Puerto Ricans dancing to music, but it's a dark club, a makeshift club, and they all have flashlights in their hands. So that's symbolically representing that Puerto Ricans are the ones who hold their own light in many different ways, through knowledge, through joy, which I read as decolonial joy. In January of 2025, Bad Bunny released his latest album, Debí Tirar Más Fotos, accompanied by a short film of the same name, further cementing Bad Bunny in his role as an archivist. He curates sounds, sentiments, and nostalgia to discuss the dangers of a possibly fleeting Puerto Rico, where the population, culture, and identity are at stake due to foreigners coming in and buying the land and taking up space without respect for the people who are already there. This film is continuing the work that El Apagón began, though they differ in genre. The lyrics are not only catchy, but poignant. Debí tirar más fotos de cuando te tuve, debí darte más besos y abrazos las veces que pude. Through the lyrical message of the titular song, it became a mantra, a lesson, and a guide for the future, not simply a catchy phrase. They also suggest that there may be a lack in memory projects, or insufficient memory, while rooted in the personal, in the familial, in the affective register, which is clear in the incentive provided in the lyrics, gesturing us to hug more, to kiss more, to touch more, a message that can be read as either familial, platonic, or romantic, but in an intimate way. This is how Bad Bunny's archival desire has changed through the construction of an effective archive and encouraging us to do so based on feelings and memories that matter to us. Archives need not only be institutional, if they don't include us, we'll build our own. This is evoked a bit differently in the short film than it did in the previous documentary.
Can I take your order?
Muy buenas. Una tripleta.
Sorry, we are all out of tripletas.
Well, pastrami.
Yeah, we have pastrami.
Okay, pastrami, eggs and cheese.
Criollo bread, sobao bread, Mallorca bread, or sweet medianoche bread.
Criollo bread.
Whole wheat Criollo or normal Criollo?
Normal.
American cheese, right?
No, I prefer Papa cheese.
Like father?
No, not like father.
In Debí Tirar Más Foto, Bad Bunny focuses on storytelling through fiction to portray the many occurrences of gentrification in Puerto Rico that affect many generations, including the change in the mundane, which signals to something larger, the ecosystems within a nation, in culture, in our food, in our language, etc. For an effect to be felt in the minuscule moments of the day-to-day, that is the main point of the film. It showcases a bigger problem that could threaten Puerto Ricans and their culture as more outsiders move in and drastically try to change the embers of everyday life. This is most evident in the scene which I just played, where the older man, the protagonist of the film, tries to order his usual at a bakery. Though the white register attendant is speaking Spanish, there's a lot that is not translating, especially when the protagonist wants queso de papa, a traditional cheddar cheese, and the attendant mistakes it for father. Though she understands and speaks Spanish, there is a register of the Puerto Rican dialect that is unavailable to her and causes a disconnect from the customer. As a representation of the elder generation in Puerto Rico, his discomfort in his own home is palpable and productive, and these moments of tension function in the film to highlight these points as larger ideas. As I think about what it means to create and produce work across the pendulum of creative and academic endeavors, to conduct research, to write histories, and create these archives, it is to do the work that exceeds beyond the geographical limitations of national borders. In the way I think about writing about Puerto Rican literature, music, and film, to also be in conversation with the larger disciplines of American studies, Latino studies, and Caribbean studies, across diasporic, archipelagic, and transnational frameworks, it also means that Bad Bunny's archival work accomplishes the same scope. I would argue Bad Bunny is highly aware of the relationality amongst the Caribbean, as one could take the film to be a cautionary tale or telling a similar story of another Caribbean nation, in the way Césaire, Kincaid, and Fanon's prolific works highlight their homelands but have been extrapolated across the Caribbean and beyond. In fact, one song in the album, Lo que le pasó a Hawaii, recognizes and highlights the similarities within the entrails of the American empire, where colonialism is an ongoing and present force in both archipelagos. And it's like he fears that Puerto Rico could head in the same direction. Even though his latest work is centered on Puerto Rican issues and challenges, it also highlights and celebrates Puerto Rican culture and identity through meticulous infusions of music, food, Puerto Rican Spanish, and it could be used relationally. Bad Bunny continues to invest in capturing Puerto Rican memory, culture, and history in his visual form, thus archiving the Puerto Rican experience and further cementing his role as an archivist that began with an archival impulse and has developed into cogent and productive cultural memory projects. To a greater extent, the film and album have asked us to celebrate our culture and think about what it means to preserve it. He released both the album and the film around El Día de los Reyes, and he even dedicated the album to Puerto Ricans globally, wherever you are, in the diaspora or in the archipelago. And so I think that it's a little gift for us all. I believe all of his archival works are a true gift as they compel us to love our people more and capture the moments that matter to us for now and the future. Thank you. Those are minor technical difficulties.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Karen Soto Vega. I won't introduce myself, but I also did want to say thank you to everyone who has been involved in putting this together, and every Wednesday meeting and all of our conversations and all of our banter and all of that. So in my larger work, I focus on Lolita Lebrón, particularly her rhetorical and material trajectories, in order to distinguish and contextualize the shifts in her Puerto Rican nationalist revolutionary rhetoric and how she is remembered. The title of the book is Rhetorics of Defiance, Anti-Colonial Action, Representation, and Reverberation, although Lolita Lebrón will be in that title. I was told I have to. So, these are one of the many little kinds of conversations we had every Wednesday. Based on archival and field research attuned to Puerto Rico and continental U.S. diasporican subversive formations, I account for the many movements Puerto Ricans make as a result of colonialism and imperialism, but also as a necessary survival strategy. Besides visiting brick and mortar archives, traditional archives, alphabetic archives, right? Predominantly housing alphabetic text, I make note of the multimodal potential of murals, performance, online communication, and circulation of audiovisual media, including songs. So studying Las Lolitas in particular, which is what I'll focus on for today, this is a group that formed to celebrate Lebrón's centennial and their artistic performances. I emphasize how their public memory efforts allow for Lebrón's rhetorics of defiance to reverberate as needed still today. In this presentation, I build on these efforts to propose multimodal archives of subversion through a sensorial methodology. Let's see. Visual art, particularly murals, have been studied as multimodal archives by anthropologist Maurice Rafael Magaña. Focusing on murals in Los Angeles, California, Magaña claims that, quote, the multimodal archive is curated by artists and social media users who tell their own collective stories through a transborder rebel aesthetic against the backdrop of the erasure, misrepresentation, and criminalization of their communities in dominant media ecologies, end quote. Although Magaña is focusing on indigenous Oaxacans, his attention to multimodal archives is consonant with conceptions of multimodality in writing studies, where I mostly reside, and is a helpful concept, I think, for Puerto Rican revolutionary rhetoric as well. Other Lolita Lebrón-inspired visual art I studied and have studied are stencils and paintings. In her CENTRO journal article, Yasmin Hernandez explains her choice of painting Lolita Lebrón nude. She writes, quote, enraged by comments about Lolita's gender that attempt to confine women to two roles, mother and lover, I recreated her profile at the time of her arrest. She's presented nude to force the voyeurs to confront their own ignorance and to challenge the shock that resonated throughout the world when everyone learned that it had been a young woman who had led that attack, end quote. Of course, the attack in question is the 1954 armed assault on the U.S. House of Representatives, which I assume doesn't need much more contextualization here. I also wanted to show you another image that Hernandez created inspired by Lebrón to show how the materiality of multiple modalities of expression provides opportunities for rhetorical establishment of political perspectives, particularly those that are not often presented in mainstream media and traditionally established academic texts. Here and in other paintings, Hernandez shifts from an exclusive focus on the iconic imagery inspired by the 1954 action and aftermath, though you will see that later on in this presentation as well. In addition to university archives, I relied on the digital repository of the San Francisco-based Freedom Archives. There I found articles, visuals, and even audio files of interviews with Lebrón. A lot of these materials were from the 25-year time frame she spent in the Alderson, West Virginia Federal Prison for Women. It also includes scripts for radio shows where transnational political prisoner activism was being amplified in this very internationalist moment. So in addition to non-alphabetic graphic texts, as Magaña was suggesting, and digital multimedia, I also pay attention to multiple modalities of expression, especially in performances of protests and sound. The chapter that I'm focusing on today explores the utility of reverberation as an affective framework that highlights geographic and temporal movement. It does so by revisiting the concept of afterlives of anti-colonial dissent, which I initially proposed in a Journal for the History of Rhetoric article. It is an analytical approach to studying performances of public memory critical of United States colonial and imperial structures. As an extension today, I draw from digital studies and sonic rhetoric to explain how reverberation is applicable in context of colonial entanglement between seemingly disparate subjects. Studying Las Rolitas and their artistic performances, I emphasize how their public memory efforts allow for Lebron's rhetorics of defiance to reverberate. Public performances of Lebron's protest rhetoric in 2019 functioned as anti-colonial action as Las Rolitas evoked a history of colonial struggle and resistance in relation to more contemporary concerns of Puerto Rican coloniality, some of which Keishla was just talking about. As a group that formed around the purpose of remembrance, Las Lolitas took on a decolonial cultural rhetoric approach to their acclamation of Lolita Lebron's activism, reenacting events that emphasized coloniality in Puerto Rico. But they also emphasized the afterlives of resistance to such colonial conditions. In this sense, afterlives of anti-colonial dissent refer to the ways in which figures and movements against colonial establishments are remembered and therefore kept active. For example, the path that Las Lolitas traced for a caminata, which was in Old San Juan, made geographical sense, but it also made rhetorical sense by making stops in spaces of contestation over Puerto Rican sovereignty. One of them was in front of the La Capilla, where Lolita Lebron herself had delivered an address for International Women's Day in 2008. So they recreated that moment. Another one was declaiming a poem in front of La Fortaleza. They yelled, "Es el grito del pueblo de mi patria cautiva," over and over again. Eda Lopez read that poem. So in performances of public memory of anti-colonial dissent, there are interrelations of subjects crying out for Puerto Rican independence across place and time. Noticing the multiplicity of Lolitas on the centennial celebration prompted me to reflect on embodiment and celebration. Did they want to channel their inner Lolita or assert that they all have the capacity of engaging rhetorics of defiance as necessary in the contemporary moment? Besides wearing a shirt specifically designed for the event, which resembled Lebron's iconic dress from the 1954 action, carrying plastic guns with a rose attached to them, that would certainly reference the significance of that moment for a remembrance of Lolita Lebron. Of course, they were all wearing a similar hairstyle in red lipstick. Characteristics that contribute to Lebron's femme fatale tropes. In addition to aesthetics, the celebration of Lebron's centennial included chants and a choreography as we marched through the entire pathway. As with every other performance, Las Lolitas, by Las Lolitas, Estribillo Ile, or Ile's chorus, I believe there's supposed to be some sound, referring to, should I try again? Okay, so, Estribillo Ile, or Ile's chorus, refers to an excerpt from the Latin Grammy Award-winning artist. Provides evidence that there is a common determination to fight against the multitude of systems affecting Puerto Rican women still today. Even the title of the song that Las Lolitas used, Contra Todo, Against Everything, is applicable. All right. Most significant for the afterlives of anti-colonial dissent is the fact that the estribillo describes a fighting, defensive spirit that embodies Lebron's defiant rhetoric, going against everything, para defender. Singing this song's chorus while performing a choreography led by artist and cultural worker Gradisa Fernandez, Las Lolitas were certainly channeling their inner Lolita, extending the concerns expressed by Ile in her song as applicable to Puerto Rican women interested in anti-colonial action. But attuned to sound studies, writing scholar Steph Serazo defines reverberation as, quote, an acoustic design term for the persistence of sound in an environment after the original source of the sound has ceased, end quote. Reverberation therefore implies repetition. The original source is repeated across time and space. In that repetition, there isn't necessarily replication, but when there is replication, reverberation is expanded. As expansion, reverberation defies boundaries. In the process, there is an interaction between elements of architecture or natural location, the environment within which it occurs. The sound waves are fed by narrow alleyways like those found in old cities like San Juan. Reverberation is therefore an apt term to describe the ways that Ile's song reverberated in the narrow streets of Old San Juan, where Lebron herself had also advocated for women, children, poor people, and other marginalized communities within an already marginalized because colonized society. Outside of the narrow conception of reverberation exclusively in sonic terms, so sorry I can't play Ile's song, but it's great. You should also check that out later. Also, make note of the palm tree leaves that are used here, because I think it'll come up in another presentation that you're going to see. I'm just saying, pay attention. Outside of the narrow conception of reverberation exclusively in sonic terms, a visual modality may also be used in creating the conditions for memorial reverberation. As we've seen, a frequent memory catalyst for Lebron is the outfit she used in the 1954 action. Paired to the visual arrangement of dressing for replication is the powerfully aspirational demand made by Lebron and other nationalists. Viva Puerto Rico libre. Que viva. On their social media, Las Lolitas NYC described themselves as, quote, women and femmes who came together in 2019 to celebrate Lolita's 100th birthday. Now march against colonialism, end quote. Prior to the November centennial celebration, they marched in the Puerto Rican Day Parade held in June that same year and have continued, and this is from last year's. In their online calls for potential volunteers, they clarify they seek to include, quote, women, girls, and femme identities in all its diversities. Therefore, they instruct potential participants to come prepared by wearing business, office skirt or pants, and importantly, don't forget the red lipstick. Unlike the San Juan performances, the set of Lolitas marching in New York City were armed with posters, their bodies, and their voice. As we can see, and maybe even hear, Puerto Rican sovereignty ideologies reverberate through the bodies of Las Lolitas, whether in Puerto Rico or New York or elsewhere. Thank you.
Te canté, así que. My name is Senya Rubino.
Soy hija de Luz Valentín, nieta de Carmen Mariani, bisnieta de Octavia Cora, quien nació en Arroyo en el 1903. And when I was a little girl, Octavia Cora would put me on her lap, and she taught me how to fold tissues into roses. Y es por ellas que estoy aquí hoy. La Mujer Boricua is an essential archive. The pillars of my artistic practice are embodiment and centering the voice as a living archive of the body. I compose using my voice and movements and allowing sounds, words, and form to emerge through improvisation. I work with an archival process of audiovisual recordings and written text in which I collect pieces as they appear. I resist the ways in which white supremacy and colonialism normalize being cut off from our bodies by leaning into embodied knowing and ancestral wisdom. Tu pelo no cabe ni en la foto is a performance I created during my fellowship here at CENTRO, informed by my research of, the group. It was informed by my research of an embodied improvisation process. In this presentation, I'm going to take you through just a few excerpts of this performance and how I created them. What does embodied improvisation look like? Improvisation means that I don't have a plan or a preconception of what I will look for or find in this archive. I am just fully present to my body and I follow this process. I allow themes to emerge through movement, voicing, writing. I repeat. So once I get into a thing or a theme, I stay in it, finding out more about it, and I transform. That thing evolves through repetition, and I follow its lead. Generally, I begin every session with a warm-up, a free write, followed by a timed improvisation. The constraint of time helps me to contain my experience and keeps me more present in my body. Here's an excerpt of the archival source material for a piece called Quítate.
I'm here. Quítate. Quítate. Quítate.
And what it became later in the performance of Tu pelo no cabe ni en la foto.
I'm here. Quítate tú pa' ponerme yo. Quítate tú.
Mira, in the next session, I create conditions for discovery and I activate my gaze. I notice my language shift and how I let my body know that it's safe before establishing the theme of look at me.
Ay, mamita, cuando te miro, mírame, look at me, look at you, look at me, look at you, look at me, look at me, look at you, look at you. Ay, mamita, cuando te quiero. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at you, look at you, look at you. A piece for looking at each other.
A piece for looking at each other. An intrusive voice interrupted my singing to announce and qualify and organize the work that was taking place. As my singing returns, the use of repetition allows this theme to be deepened and transformed, adding another line where I find my chorus. With those eyes.
Look at me, look at you, look at you, look at you, look at me, look at me, look at me, with those eyes, with those eyes.
And here's an excerpt of Look at Me from my performance, Tu pelo no cabe ni en la foto. But first, an intrusive thought, which is part of an embodied practice. So for me, they often take on a persona of a booking agent, a manager, a director type, someone who's seeking to commercialize, rationalize, or tear down an idea that's emerging. As opposed to ignoring an intrusive thought, I take a moment to voice it. I have found it to be more generative to fully honor all of what is present in my consciousness as opposed to shutting down, which robs me of energy and focus. Accepting all parts helps me stay in a fully embodied state for longer stretches of time. And also it lets my body archive know that it's safe to continue to transmit and to feel what is there. It's a practice of body listening. And now here's Look at Me.
Keeps changing, I'm dead strangers too. Is it me? Is it you? Who is really true? With those eyes, with those eyes, with those eyes.
Lastly, the tu más theme is composed from a direct transcription of an embodied improvisation. On this left clip, you'll hear the early stages of finding the theme.
Tu más, 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 tu más.
On the right, you'll see the 4 on the floor beat emerges, and that's orchestrated as a kick drum in the final arrangement. The B section is found with a ratata and a mistake of hitting the screen and hurting my finger, which leads to an ooey that is added into the form. Pues errors are often embraced as an opportunity to expand on a theme or take it in a different direction. Repetition is key in the process of allowing an idea to shake through and find its form. Allow, repeat, transform. Pues embodied improvisation gives voice to my body archive. I want to thank my colleagues in the Rooted and Relational Fellowship and all of the Centro community at large for supporting, collaborating, and investing in this work. I want to give a special thanks also to the incredible crew of artists and technicians who helped me bring this project to life. Thank you.
You all for your wonderful, rich, transformative work that you're doing. I think it's really interesting how like we're all cultural workers. We're like transgressing archives in different ways. We're having these reckonings in our body and our work for our community. I think it's really important. I do have a question to open up the floor, but please head to the mics on the side and prepare your questions. But just to start thinking about the work that you guys are doing, what possibilities do you see for the future of archives in your work?
Bueno, vamos para encima, mi gente. I see a lot of possibilities for the future of this archive, considering my body, right, and the impulses and the memory that stem from it. I see a lot of territory to explore. Another project that I didn't get a chance to talk about today that I would like to touch on is a Círculo de Voces that I'm working on, which is continuing with this theme of bringing out the voice as a living archive of the body and really bringing that into community and collective voicing practices. So the idea is to create talleres, workshops, círculos in which the choir is like a public service, like a park or like any community resource where we could come together and voice. And we actually hosted a Círculo de Voces here in the fall, and some of Centro staff contributed to that and brought their voices and channeled some voices of their ancestors. And I think that now more than ever, this tapping into our embodied knowledge is so needed, and I think can lead us towards envisioning these new futures that we've been talking about today.
I'll just jump in really quickly. Thank you for that question. I think throughout this year, we've been talking about what kinds of archives exist, what are the problems with archives, and then I kind of became known as the person who hated the term alternative archives, which is why I had to come up with something else. But I think it's that, engaging with the other modes of archiving or documenting or remembering, which is what I do a lot in my work, because there are two options, right? If there's erasure, if there's exclusion in the archives, or they're misrepresenting or ghosting the people that you are trying to, or the communities that you're trying to see, then you either have to read against those archives or find what's in the gaps or what else exists, or you find the other modes that exist that people have constantly been telling their stories or remembering. It's just not the traditional way. It's not the way that's sort of recognized or seen as an archive. And maybe the archivists will hate me, but I think that there's a lot more to see if we are more open to what we conceive as archives or memory projects that matter.
Yeah, I'd like to echo all of that. No, I'm wondering, in the future of archives, of course, I have concerns, whether that's the preservation of stuff, even the transferring into digital medium, and the preservation of that as technology changes, as they get erased, particularly under the current situation. So those are concerns. But then I'm here all day long listening to how people are reinventing, remapping, unmapping, doing all kinds of things with existing archives and new archives. And that just makes me really hopeful. Plus I can add other projects, somehow. I just thought this morning about, I don't know if anyone knows about it, but the La Escuela del Olor. It's a collective in Puerto Rico, and they have been archiving aromas, plants and fruits, and they had a show at the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in Puerto Rico, I think, about 3 years ago. So so things like that, whether we're talking about community archives, obviously institutional archives, because the work that CENTRO is doing is amazing, but also these other alternative archives, particularly art-based or artist-led, and when community and artists get together as well, I'm really hopeful about that. So.
I guess I could say a few things. This is so weird. Okay. So as I was thinking about the multimodality of this subversive archives, I also went back to Centro's archive and looked for whatever Lolita Lebron related non-alphabetic text, potential material was, and it was a tape of a recorded interview with Ruth Reynolds, and it was transcribed. So, so to me, I was just like, okay, it goes back to the word, and whether it's written or orally. So that a lot of that happens. But then, what happens with imagery? It gets placed in a museum, right? So just like, and what happens to murals? They're everywhere. They're accessible for everyone. I think there's a lot of cool work happening in Puerto Rico with muralism. Maybe we'll hear a bit more about that in a future iteration. But of course, then performance. How do you archive performance? And it usually happens through audiovisual recording, right? Or reiterating. So I hope that, just thinking of the future performances, then that continues to be reiterated, right? But yeah, those are just some thoughts. But it feels to me like the archive can and is already in so many different places, right? Is it in the memory work that's cultural, that is artistic? Is it in actual like paintings or visual media, et cetera, right? I think that we've already been paying attention to it. It's just a matter of continuing to expand it. And at least like in the work that we've been seeing, our conceptions of what values or what is valued or what counts, that's what I think a lot of us have been focusing on.
Can I add one more thing? I also think that what's really helpful here is that we think about accessibility at times when we're thinking about archives. And I know like my family and my friend group, they're not going to archival institutions or libraries often, especially like the people that I like sit with every day and have dinner. Like my mom is not going to El Archivo. She wants to know something, she's gonna ask me, or like wants to do a basic Google search. So I think that these multimodal archives, alternative archives, lo que sea, or these art projects, there are ways that we can engage with these bigger ideas and logics for the everyday folk, for the people who, that aren't gonna get advanced degrees. Like I was the first in my family to get a doctorate, and hopefully more do, but I can't champion those studies right now. But like I was thinking about this because my cousin who has a high school diploma, right? She actually engages with me with a lot of these ideas and wants to learn more. And I'm like, oh, and literally like, I'm like, remember when Bad Bunny did this in this video? That's literally what I'm talking about. And we have these conversations and can really go to great lengths. And when sort of knowledges feel like inaccessible to her, this feels like she can be a part of the conversation. So when I think about archives, I love them, but I really love these alternative ways of knowing or remembering or documenting because it lets me have those conversations or bring these knowledges to the people that I really care about and for them to be able to participate too. And that's where I see that future.
Thank you, y'all. I do have more questions, but we're going to open up to the audience and then see what's up.
Hi, I just want to say thank you. Your panel was very thought-provoking. Let me just make it so everyone can hear. My question is for Carrie Ann. So one would argue that Lebron's efforts during her lifetime went beyond the artistic or how she presented as a woman in the movement. And her actions were specifically rooted in revolutionary clandestine action and armed resistance. So do you feel like there is like a call to action that the Lolitas have made to Boricua women and femmes both here in the diaspora, to honor and continue her sacrificial revolutionary work wholly, meaning through like campaign work, mutual aid, mass work, community integration, things of that nature.
Thank you for that wonderful question. I'm definitely gonna chat more with you in a little bit. I think, yes. In particular, I was able to engage in conversation with folks in Puerto Rico in 2019. So what I can say about that, it was a large group of left, subdivided groups, right, coming in to honor Lolita. So in terms of what that looks like, they all had their own take on what that means, right? They all were fighting for Puerto Rico's independence, but in what way? Some were educators, others are Maria Lourdes Santiago, right? And so some are more established, right, political positions. Others are in the party, but doing kind of like background work. And then yet again, others were artists and activists who do take that on as a sort of embodied practice, right? That their memory work is embodied, but also their decolonial work is embodied. So I would say yes to your question, but at the same time, I do want to note, right, that still today, I mean, that was 2019, but still today, there is fragmentation within the left, right? And so I think that what Lolita did was to put them together and to say there is a higher concern that we need to attend to, and that would ultimately trickle down into all the other concerns, right? Again, women, poor people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People that she also herself, right, like was very close to. And yeah, I have friends who remember seeing her in all the protests in the university, right? And just like being able to speak to her because she was there. And so in my opinion, yes, they were trying to embody that presence and then therefore potentially inspire others. One interesting random comment moment, it was on Old San Juan. So there were the different groups of tourists that are typically in Old San Juan. And so because we were marching, there were a few sets of young women who came and asked like, oh, is this a protest? And then one older lady was like, this is not a protest, this is a celebration. And so these, white women were like, oh, okay, and then left. And yet there was another group of Black women who were like, oh, tell me more about this woman, and just kept marching with us for like 2 or 3 blocks, kind of joined in on the celebration. So in a way, it was also that kind of education project, that it was not just for within the movement, but also for other folks to kind of interpret and become interested in the fight. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Yeah, so thank you. This panel was amazing. My question is for Xenia. So, Songbird, I love you. That was amazing. And I think I am so curious to hear about like your relationship with your voice and your body over time, whether that's like through the course of the day or just as you get older and like spend more time in your body. What changes do you notice? And do you ever find that you try to like usher it in one direction or another, or do you just embrace it all?
Thank you for that question. It reminds me of like why I even started this research to begin with, which was that I was feeling disconnected from my body. I was feeling completely disembodied. So after years of touring and putting records out and personal catastrophe in my family and trauma, I realized that I had lost. What was the diagnosis? Pérdida de espíritu, loss of spirit. And so the task was to find that. And the first step was to re-enter my body, right? And so I looked to movement practitioners, people who worked in choreography, people who worked with their bodies. And although I'm a performer and I'm a singer and my instrument is inside of my body, I was not here. So that reconnection and that entry point back in looked like me taking all of my instruments out of my studio and leaving only a mirror and myself for quite some time, and challenging myself to feel what it feels like in this body, right? And it doesn't always feel good, and a lot of times it doesn't. And also to invite myself to feel pleasure in my body and being in my body. But what comes with inviting yourself to feel pleasure is also feeling pain, right? Once you tap in, if you just do a quick body scan right now, you might be doing fine, but at the moment I ask you to scan and go down, you're gonna start, ay, me duele la espalda, my neck, como que, ay, ese, whatever, la cadera, me pica aquí. Like, you know, you become conscious of that, right? So it is what I said earlier about this body listening, right? And building a relationship like any other, right? That you have in your life. And for me, it was finding a new way into music making, actually a way back to music making and to being alive even, right? Because there was a moment where that felt impossible, right? So finding a way to being alive and then taking a step further and getting close to my artistic practice again through the body, right? And yeah, it took like breaking my voice. You know, I had vocal injury for a while. I thought I would never sing again. Like it was, you know, twists and turns, girl. Like just a lot. But you know, what I've found is just a new relationship, a new way of being in community with others, right? In sensing, right, what each body knows, right, and trusting in that. And I've seen it time and time again when given the opportunity to vocalize with people or to be in community with people like we have been here in the fellowship, right? Just not discounting what you know, that your body keeps the score, right? That we've heard the body keeps the score, right? It does. And what we're talking about in terms of archiving as well, there are endless archives that you contain, right? And there's endless knowing and endless ways that your body contains in the way that you remember the voice of a loved one and how that loved one says your name, in the ways in which you move when you see the face of your lover, right? There is knowing in that. And that is the kind of decolonial thinking that we have to do to give el respeto and the validity that that knowledge requires.
Amazing. I wanted to quickly also just say, if I could share a moment in which it was the day after the election. And we were all gathering because it was a Wednesday. And I just wanted to give props to Senia again. I have done this before because she sort of guided us through a body scan, as she was just kind of referring to, right? Like, and it was so cathartic and it was so needed. And I feel like that wasn't just a glimpse of the kind of practice that you've been developing. And that I think she was just referring to here. And there was such potential. Yeah, I just, props again. That's
and
it.
It's just remembering because you all know, because we already know. It's just that we have to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, because when you're talking about sensing and feeling, you know, it's making me think obviously of touch, and I know I'm going to go back to the, you know, School of Smell, la Escuela del Olor, but it is about acknowledging the superiority of the visual, you know, what we think of visual and sound being superior possibly to other senses. And so I love when you're talking about how we're feeling, how touch, how this collective talks about smell and the ancestral smell and the smell of fruits that we barely see anymore back home and all of that. So again, expanding the archive beyond even just the mind and reason and text into other senses as well.
And I think we are going to give one more round of applause for the panelists today.